consumers.
Well, in another sign that relations with the Chinese Communist Party are thawing, an official delegation of the Australian Parliament is in Beijing this week. The group's there at the invitation of the Chinese Premier, and it's going where no similar group has been for more than 5 years now. We caught up with delegation member Jerome Laxale from the Labor-held seat of Bennelong. Our conversation started, though, on card surcharges, something he's been pushing for action on through House committees. Jerome Laxale, we're so grateful that you could find time on what I know is a very busy program for your parliamentary delegation there in China. We will come to that in a moment, but why don't we start with something the government's announced and which you've championed for many months now, including on this program. Its announcement on debit card surcharges says it's, quote, prepared to ban these surcharges, prepared to, subject to certain things happening. Is that a commitment?
Look, I think it's a step in the right direction. The laws governing digital payments and surcharges are 20 years old. And earlier, a couple of months ago, the RBA announced that they were going to review those surcharges. And you would have seen, me come on your show and raise this in a number of different forums. So for the government to go out there and say that they're prepared to have a digital fee-free payment, but also importantly acknowledge that this cannot just be a simple ban, that cost to businesses also must be addressed, I think is a really important step. It sends a signal to the RBA that they've got work to do, which is what I've been calling for the last few months. So woke up to some great news this morning all the way in Beijing.
Yeah, but there would be embedded costs in the ongoing development of these payment systems. When you impose something like a ban, it's not cost-free in that sense. Who would bear those costs?
Well, Greg, all these arguments fall apart when you compare digital payments to cash, right? There have been embedded costs for cash for millennia that have been carried in certain ways, particularly by banks. And even recently, banks said they're paying up to $350 million each to circulate cash around, as they should. Now, we know that digital payments are effectively much cheaper than cash. We've had evidence of that nature at the bank hearing. So we've got this situation in Australia where the cheapest form of payment is being charged for more than the alternative. That's a byproduct of laws that are now approaching 20 years old. They need updating. The review's announced. The government have lent into that, and that's something we should all welcome.
I know the RBA will refine these figures, but you must have some estimates presented to you through your committee work and elsewhere, Jerome, about the consumer savings if a ban was to be introduced. What is that figure?
Well, there's total fees and charges to businesses and consumers approaching $6 to $7 billion. Surcharging has been estimated at $4 billion by CanStar. And importantly, the differential between the cost to big business and small business, particularly for debit payments, has been costed at about $1.7 billion. So there's a real inequity at the cost. Then, of course, we've got the issue of surcharging, all for a payment method. And I've said this all along. Digital should be cheaper or the same cost as the non-digital alternative. And that's what I've been pushing for the last 3 months. And looks like we're well on a process to get there.
Sure. Now, the timing on this, I think the government has foreshadowed if it does get there, it would make this take effect in January of 2026. The RBA has to complete its work in the meantime. How does it work, though? Is it the RBA alone that can implement this? Would it require legislation? If it did, would that or should that be passed in the life of the current Parliament?
Well, just recently, I think just in the last sitting week, before I travelled, the Payment Services Regulation Act updates to that, strengthening the RBA's powers, did pass the lower house. It now has a journey to the Senate. If legislation is required following the view, I'm sure that's something the government will consider, but whether or not legislation is needed will be determined by what solutions are proposed in the review. There are a number of ways that this can be done. If more powers are needed, that's something the government will have to consider, but that's not my understanding to date. But let's see what the review says. Importantly, the review is needed, as I said, not only just to talk about the surcharging, but to address the costs. We can't just ban surcharging. The costs need to be addressed. so that small businesses don't have to wear these exorbitant fees. That work needs to be done, and that's what the RBA announced they'd be doing from today.
Yep, and a bit of a process to go on with in the meantime.
Yeah,
All right.
That's appropriate, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Let's go to your delegation now, Jerome Lexal. You're in Beijing, the first parliamentary delegation to China in 5 years. It's led by the Senate President. The trip was billed when it was announced as central to managing our differences. What differences or objections has your group taken the opportunity to raise, or will take the opportunity to raise on this trip?
Well, this is the first parliamentary delegation in 7 years, and it shows that our relationship continues to stabilise and it reflects progress under the Albanese government. Importantly also, it's bipartisan, and that's the first of its nature in 7 years. And yes, we have raised issues. We've raised issues of human rights, consular cases, regional stability, but we've also talked about trade. And importantly, it's important that your viewers know when we came to government, there were $20 billion of trade impediments on Australia, and they've all but been lifted because of dialogue, because we've continued to stabilise the relationship. But, you know, I think you've heard the Prime Minister say it, you've heard the Foreign Minister say it. We'll agree where we can, we'll disagree where we must, and we'll always act in the national interest, and that's what we're doing on this trip.
Yeah, I understand that. On forms of coercion, we've seen the People's Liberation Army swarm sea and air off Taiwan. 125 planes involved yesterday. Is that something your delegation has raised?
Well, regional stability has been raised, yep, and I'm sure more details will come out. We've got more meetings today, and over the coming days, there'll be a report tabled in Parliament, and it'll be appropriate for the President to address more details on our return from the delegation. But we've raised issues important to Australians.
You have a large Chinese-Australian community in your electorate of Bennelong, Jerome. How does this trip play with them? I understand they've been monitoring your movements on social media. Is there a domestic political imperative to you being a part of this?
Our government was elected to stabilise our foreign relationships. You know, recall what happened with the EU and France, recall what happened under the former government with the Pacific, and of course our relationship with China. We're enacting our election commitments to stabilise foreign relations and have dialogue with key regional partners and countries, and that's exactly what we're doing. People in my electorate are happy that the government's taking this approach, and it's, you know, they're happy that I'm here as well. So it's a good thing.
Okay, now, look, you might indulge me in one question from afar. I hope you've been able to keep up with the news. It's become a bit of a talking point around here today, Jerome. The Prime Minister and his fiancée, Jodie Hayden, are on the brink of a $4 million home purchase on the New South Wales Central Coast. Voters in a cost of living and housing affordability crisis, are they going to be comfortable with that?
So an engaged couple purchased a home. I don't think this is groundbreaking news here, Greg. I think the Prime Minister recently sold his house. He's now bought one in the Central Coast. I mean, as a Sydney sider, I might question his choice of location, but I mean, you know, like he's engaged. He just sold his home. He's buying a new one with his partner. It's pretty nice, actually.
I understand. Yes, I think settlement is pending, or processes are still pending on the sale of the Dulwich Hill property. Just for clarification, but the wheels are in motion from what we're told. Jerome Lexal, thank you. We'll let you get on with that program there in Beijing and talk when you get back.
Thank you. See ya.